How could I have known that a simple moment would change everything? It started like any other day until I walked into that room. When I saw the door slightly ajar, something inside me shifted. I could have turned back, pretended I hadn't noticed, but I didn't. Because in that instant, when I realized what was unfolding, I knew my life would never be the same again. And yes, I was the one to blame here. I was the one who set it all in motion and the one who didn't stop it. George was at work, and the house was unusually quiet. But I could hear faint sounds coming from upstairs. Elliot was in his room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another moment of a young man lost in his own world. But then I wondered, maybe he'd like a coffee. A little chat wouldn't hurt. As I headed up the stairs, I tried to figure out where the noises were coming from. When I got closer to his room, I noticed the door was barely open. I took a deep breath, about to call out to him, when my gaze fell on Elliot. He was sitting on his bed, his laptop in front of him, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. His fingers were moving, and at first, I thought he was just watching something exciting like an action movie. But as I took another step, shifting my angle, everything in me froze. That's when I understood exactly what Elliot was doing. The reflection on the screen hit me like a slap, and a cold wave washed over me. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't wanted to see this. Elliot scrambled to cover up, desperately lowering the volume on his laptop, but it was too late. The damage had been done. When our eyes met, his face turned crimson, and the shame in his eyes was unmistakable. I'm sorry, he stammered, quickly looking away. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. The door. I started, but no words came out. A strange warmth spread through me. Yes, I was embarrassed, but my mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. I quickly left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breath. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. What had I just done? Why had I been so careless? But was I the only one to blame here? Stop it, Darlene, I told myself sharply. But the chaos inside me wasn't only because of what I'd seen. Elliot was 23 now, not a kid anymore. But I was 47, a woman who had seen her fair share of shame. Still, I'd never been in a situation like this before, and yet I knew exactly what shame felt like. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart still racing. Running my fingers through my hair, I tried to pull myself together. Then, Elliot appeared in the doorway. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, cleared his throat, and kept his eyes lowered. Darlene,
I'm sorry.
I thought I'd closed the door, he said, his voice unsure but sincere. I shook my head quickly, avoiding his gaze.
No.
Actually, I should be the one apologizing. I should have knocked before coming in, I said hurriedly, unsure of what else to say. Silence followed. But it wasn't just any silence. We had lived in the same house for years, but this was the first time we'd ever looked at each other like this. The first time there was such tension between us. I'll go downstairs and start dinner, I said, turning quickly toward the stairs. My voice trembled, but I tried my best to hold it together. Elliot didn't respond. He just watched me, his eyes following every movement, like he was trying to piece something together in his mind. That evening, we didn't speak. No texts, no eye contact, no small talk. The silence between us was deafening, whispering that things would never be the same again. At dinner, we sat across from each other at the same table, but we couldn't look each other in the eye. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against our plates. We both knew we needed to talk, to ease the tension. But neither of us knew how. The night passed, and then the next day and the one after that. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but nothing was. Our silence only made the invisible tension between us grow. Then one afternoon, Elliot sat next to me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but it was clear he wanted to fix things. Darlene, about the other day, I'm really embarrassed.
I'm sorry.
I didn't want things to be this way. Please, I don't want this to ruin things between us, he said, his voice nervous but sincere. I took a deep breath. As strange and unexpected as this all was, I needed to put him at ease. I smiled, shrugging slightly. Oh, Elliot, believe me, I've had my fair share of embarrassing moments over the years. I shared a few of those moments with him, and his smile softened a little. He nodded, his embarrassment fading just a bit. For a moment, it felt like the tension had lifted. But deep down, I knew nothing had really changed. Even though things seemed to be improving, I could feel that the boundaries between us had completely disappeared. Things were about to shift, and I knew it. Elliot let out a small chuckle, lowering his gaze to the table. I guess we're even now, he said quietly. I frowned slightly and turned toward him. What do you mean? I asked, curiosity creeping into my voice. For a brief moment, his expression changed, like he'd realized he'd said too much. He rubbed the back of his neck, hesitating, but by now, he had no choice but to continue. He took a deep breath, then looked away, muttering, I've seen you the same way, you just didn't know about it. It felt like electricity had shot through my body. I froze.
What?
I whispered, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Elliot's face was flushed, but he didn't stop. I never told you because I was too embarrassed, but I've never been able to forget. Actually, it's been my little secret, something I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried. My heart started pounding wildly, and a strange warmth spread through me, an unfamiliar sensation that told me something had shifted. Elliot's words weren't just a confession. They tore down the last of the walls between us. I looked at him, and he was looking at me, too. By now, we both knew this wasn't just any conversation. The air in the room had thickened, and everything had changed. From that moment, things were never the same again. There had always been some distance between us before, an invisible boundary that kept us apart, but now, it felt like that boundary had disappeared without either of us even realizing it. I found myself spending more time with Elliot, sharing small moments, conversations that seemed insignificant at first, but in reality, they only added fuel to the tension between us. We even started watching movies together, something we'd never done before. Before, we'd always kept our distance, but now there was this unspoken pull between us, something we both felt but never spoke about. Sometimes, when Elliot rested his arm on the couch, or when my hand brushed against his leg, or when our laughter mixed together, I felt something strange stirring inside me. But I tried to push it away, ignore it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, unable to settle, the restlessness in me growing stronger. There was only one thing on my mind. Elliot, this couldn't go on. I needed to set a boundary. If he had feelings for me, I had to be direct and stop it before it went too far. With that thought, I got out of bed, my heart racing, but my feet led me straight to Elliot's room. His door was slightly ajar, the soft glow of light inside spilling into the hallway. As I stepped in, I saw him there sleeping. But in that moment, my eyes weren't on him. They were focused on something else, something much bigger. My breath caught and my body froze. Seeing him like that stirred up a storm inside me. I shouldn't have seen it. I should have turned around immediately, but I didn't. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what I was feeling, then pulled myself back. There was something inside me I couldn't ignore, but I had to suppress it. I returned to my room, lay down, but nothing was the same anymore. That night, I had no idea just how much more complicated things were about to become. No matter what I did, I couldn't resist the growing closeness between me and Elliot. With each passing day, the boundaries between us blurred, and the pull between us only grew stronger. I didn't even realize how far things had gone until it felt like turning back was no longer an option. Then Elliot came home. He was drunk. The noise from the door, the things he knocked over, it all could have woken George. But I knew how hard it was for George to wake up, so I quickly left my room and went to Elliot. I didn't even have time to properly fix myself before I was standing next to him. His eyes were slightly unfocused, and a faint smile lingered on his lips. "Darlene, are you real?" he mumbled, his words slurred by the alcohol but still genuine. I took a deep breath, grabbing his arm. "Elliot, come on, you can't go upstairs like this. We have to be quiet." But Elliot's gaze stayed locked on me. He smiled softly, his eyes moving slowly over me. You know, you're really beautiful. Have you always been like this, or did I just never notice? I froze for a moment, but quickly gathered myself. Elliot, that's enough. Come to the kitchen. I'll make you some coffee. I led him to the kitchen, trying to sober him up a bit, but his gaze and the things he was saying made something inside me unravel. Elliot sat down in a chair while I prepared the coffee, but suddenly, the cup slipped from his hands, spilling onto the counter. Elliot, you need to be more careful, I whispered, trying to clean up the mess quickly. But he just smiled softly. Were you always this sweet? I hurried to clean the kitchen. We couldn't stay there any longer. George was upstairs sleeping, and with Elliot in the state, we couldn't afford to make any more noise. All right, we're going upstairs, but be quiet, I warned, slipping my arm around his and guiding him toward the stairs. By the time we reached his room, his movements had become even more unsteady. He needed to change clothes, but he was too out of it to do it on his own. At first, I wanted to walk away, but when I saw him struggling to take off his shirt, I instinctively stepped in to help. As my fingers reached for the buttons of his shirt, Elliot's breathing slowed. In that moment, the tension between us felt suffocating. The silence only made it more intense. I knew exactly what I was doing, yet at the same time, I had no idea. Elliot was looking at me differently, and I realized this was one of those moments that we could never take back. Elliot hesitated as he tried to change, letting his hands fall to his sides as our eyes locked. That was when I noticed my breathing had quickened. The room felt so quiet, the air so heavy, it was hard to breathe. I'm not playing this game anymore, Darlene, he said, his voice soft but filled with certainty. I stared at him, not blinking. My heart was racing, but what was Elliot trying to say? Are you? He asked, his voice deepening slightly. We both know it's been there, even if you won't admit it. You don't think about it at all? I know it crosses your mind before you sleep. A shiver ran through me, and I took a small step back, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Elliot, this isn't right, I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled slightly, but it wasn't innocent. We passed the point of deciding what's right a long time ago, Darlene. Stop lying to yourself. Then he took a step forward, and another, until he was so close I could feel his breath against my skin. He reached up, his fingers gently brushing my cheek. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew he was right. And then his lips met mine. All the silence, all the tension, it all came together in that one moment. Everything I'd been questioning, every doubt, faded away. I hadn't resisted him, and deep down, I realized I'd never wanted to. My hands were trembling, but I didn't pull away. When I saw the determination in Elliot's eyes, I knew there was no turning back. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and slowly slid the straps of my clothing off my shoulders. You're right, Elliot, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Let's not play this game any longer. Closing the distance between us completely, I lay back on the bed. My heart was pounding, but turning back wasn't an option anymore. Elliot leaned over me, looking into my eyes for a moment before he smiled. Don't be afraid, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. Everything is right. I looked away, a shiver running through me. Even though I couldn't admit it to myself, I knew how long I'd been waiting for this moment. But still, the words slipped from my lips. Elliot, I'm a little scared. He smiled, unfazed, and ignored what I said, as if it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't, especially since he was drunk. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, George mustn't wake up. I understood exactly what he meant, that there had to be silence. I don't even know how I felt in that moment. There was something enormous building inside me, and I had to stop myself from making any noise. Elliot looked at me and said something like, I know, darling. Everything's great, and so are you. What did he know? I think he could feel it. He must have understood me in some way. Elliot was so drunk, he didn't care about anything. In fact, even the situation itself was affecting me deeply. The mix of excitement, everything else that was happening, and the overwhelming sensation of something significant, something too much. He barely responded, just mumbled, okay, But he didn't slow down, continuing at the same pace, faster and more intensely. I felt another surge inside me, but I didn't care about anything anymore. I wasn't even myself anymore. It must have pleased him, because he let go completely. He let himself give in, fully. But that was too much. The heat inside me, the rush, it was overwhelming. Quickly, I laid Elliot down on his bed, covering him with the blankets, and then I locked the door behind me. I needed to take a shower, something to clear my mind, to wash away the intensity of everything. I didn't know what had just happened, or what was going to come next. I thought about it in the shower, but at the same time, I felt nervous and uneasy. Oddly enough, though, by the time I stepped out, I felt surprisingly calm. My mind was clearer. I couldn't even be angry with myself. My body felt just as relaxed as my thoughts. I dressed in silence, walked back to my bed, and lay down like nothing had happened. But the truth? It was just a moment of reckless excitement, a rush of desire. Nothing that simple ever stays simple, though. This wasn't going to stay simple either. It didn't end there. Bigger things, more intense things were going to happen, and in the end, George was going to find out everything. This story isn't over yet. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Turn on notifications and leave a comment. It helps you stay ahead for these stories. Your support means everything. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening.